Hello, good morning. I'm Matt Addison, James Martin alongside me today to have a chat around a couple of Reds topics. If you've got any comments or questions, do stick them into the comments section as we go. We'll get to as many of those as we can, to be honest. There's not loads for us to talk about this morning, so you'll be doing us a favour, if nothing else. We're going to talk about Sadio Mane and Bayern Munich shortly, but I think, James, we should probably start with the Liverpool Women, who won 2-1 against Chelsea yesterday. I don't know whether you watched it or I think you've seen the highlights since, but pretty big result for them on the opening day.
Yeah, back in the Super League, back in the big time, which I think we've all thought for a while is where Liverpool should be. It was not necessarily a great look for the club when you got your women's team down in the second tier, and when the men's team were flying so high at the time. It never looked quite right. So it's good to see that that they're back on the right path. They got Matt Beard back in, didn't they? He led them to a Super League title way back in the day. That's going back many years now, and they've got him back in. He's won promotion at the first time of asking, and then taken a really big scalp in the first game back in the Super League with Chelsea, who I think have won something mad like 5 of the last 6 or something. This is a properly serious women's team. They're a proper outfit, and it's a big win. I don't think anyone was necessarily expecting it. It wasn't the prettiest of performances, 3 goals, all penalties, but it's it got the 3 points, which in any version of the game is what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. A record crowd, I think, as well at Prenton Park. Obviously, they've played at Anfield and had a lot more people attending there, but a record one for being at Prenton Park, back at Anfield next weekend as well for the game against Everton. So, yeah, it was a big result, but slightly fortunate, I think, across the course of the game. I think Chelsea, you could see how good a team that they are, to be honest. I think they're going to be right up there. I think they won the league last season. So, yeah, it was a big 3 points for Liverpool, but I think probably the aim for them is just to stay in the top division. Like you say, they've not been there for a couple of years. They got relegated in 2020. I think they felt they were a little bit unlucky in terms of kind of the points per game thing that got them relegated. They weren't allowed to kind of play out their own destiny. So, yeah, it took them a couple of attempts to get back up. But I suppose now the aim has to be just to stay up. As much as a win over Chelsea was great to start with, probably still a long way to battle this season.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at first anyway, maybe a couple more results like this and the expectations change over the course of the season. But yeah, I think the initial priority will be cementing themselves back in the division. I suppose when you compare it to the men's game, there's maybe more of a chance that you can get promoted and then immediately push higher up the table because the financial disparities are less huge. But, there are clubs like Chelsea who have been, funneling funding into the women's team more effectively over the last few years, so they still take some catching. No one will be looking right at the top end of the table just yet, but yeah, why not go for what would be an amazing season? It's been an encouraging first result, that's for sure, and much as we were saying, it was scrappy. There were certainly moments of quality, I think, particularly in the lead up to what was eventually the winning penalty. That was a really nice piece of play, wasn't it? Sort of Stengel won it and then took it. I think sort of took the ball down just beyond the halfway line, really sort of headed touch, and then sort of ran all the way in herself. I was watching a TikTok about it actually, where someone was saying it was like Fernando Torres, and you could see the stylistic similarity. So yeah, if they're earning more comparisons like that over the season, then I'm sure they'll be doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see how they get on next weekend. If they can sort of win at Anfield, that'd be a really good start to the season for them. I think they play Tottenham after that as well. So a couple of tough games to start the season with, but I'm sure that'll be how it is for the majority of the season. But we'll move on to our second topic then. Sadio Mane. I wanted to have a bit of a conversation around him, really. We've written a couple of bits on the Liverpool.com website around him recently. There's been a bit of a narrative, really, that Liverpool's struggles at the start of this season have possibly come down a little bit to not having Sadio Mane there. But Bayern Munich, I think, on the worst run in the Bundesliga since 2001. I think it's 3 games in a row now that they've not won. And that doesn't sound too bad, but it doesn't really happen in Germany.
No, and I mean, for a while, it was just the draws sort of stacking up, wasn't it? But then I think they lost to Augsburg at the weekend. So, yeah, what was just a bit of a blip. I mean, by Bayern standards, even the blip was their worst in about 15 years or something crazy in terms of the start of the season. But what could have just been turned around very easily is now starting to look a little bit more concerning. It's similar story with Mane, I suppose. The first 2 games, he looked like the Mane that Liverpool knew, just as Bayern looked like the Bayern we've all been used to. They, I think after 3 games, they'd scored a record number of goals in the opening 3 games. So it was all looking pretty much business as usual. But yeah, then the draws kicked in, and now, of course, the recent defeat. Mane's been struggling. I think Nagelsmann's had to come out and defend him already, which is not something you really want. It never is a great sign that things have started as everyone would have hoped. That doesn't mean Liverpool aren't missing him. I think both things can be true. He can be struggling to adapt at Bayern, while also Liverpool have struggled to adapt to their replacements. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily an indictment of the business on either side. I think Mane is likely to come good. I think Liverpool's replacements are likely to come good. But if nothing else, I suppose it's a reminder that patience is needed, regardless of who you sell and who you buy.
I think the one thing that I've seen a number of people saying who watch Bayern Munich far more regularly than I do, certainly, is that Sadio Mane has kind of played a little bit on the left-hand side and struggled. He's played better when he's been playing through the middle. But I think that's kind of what we saw with Liverpool last season, isn't it? It was only when he moved into that central position that suddenly he looked like a bit of a different player. And to me, that, I know, it's not obviously just at Bayern. As I say, it's happened at the back end of last season for Liverpool as well. There's a bit of evidence there mounting that says to me maybe he's not quite the same player that he was. I think he's changed into a slightly different player. I wonder whether Bayern kind of thought that they were getting the old winger, fast, tricky pace, that kind of Sadio Mane, where possibly they might actually have a really good number 9 if they play in there. It's just a case of finding that position where they can get the most out of him. Yeah,
potentially. I mean, it was a useful time for him to explode at Liverpool in that sense, given that Mane himself was convinced he wanted to leave. So, that kind of good run as a number 9 certainly probably allowed Liverpool to bump the price up a bit. When we sold him, people were still saying that doesn't seem like loads. But, for a player who up until that point had pretty much been in decline, I mean, hence one of the reasons why Luis Diaz was being lined up. He was the replacement on that left wing where, as you say, Mane had looked, decreasingly effective just for a fairly sustained period of time. So, yeah, that run at number 9 was interesting. It potentially showed the way forward in that, it was a new lease of life for him. He looked a lot better. But as you say, if anyone was thinking that meant he was back and would be the Mane of old, that was maybe optimistic because, on the wing, maybe it is that half yard of pace. Maybe who knows what it is really. I think that's the only thing that seems to make any kind of sense. But whether that's just constructing a narrative around the form, it's hard to say. Maybe he'll, because he still looks quick when he gets in full flow. So it's quite hard to explain exactly what's changed. But the undeniable fact is he hasn't looked that effective on the wing for quite a long time. So, but equally, as Kumar says, he's not a number 9 in a traditional sense. He's not going to come in and replace Lewandowski, for instance. That's just, that's not realistic. So, it's a bit of a conundrum for Bayern in terms of where they slot him in. You'd have thought that they would have known that when they signed him, but I suppose so far you'd say there hasn't necessarily been the clearest plan about how they're going to get the most out of him.
Yeah, I suppose the Lewandowski point is an interesting one as well, isn't it? The number of goals that he has scored, they were always probably going to drop off a little bit, whoever they got in off the back of him. But just before we finish as well, I know I'm a huge fan of Julian Nagelsmann. I wanted to mention him as well. There seems to be a little bit of pressure on him because of this run. He's one that I've always looked at as a potential at some point to come to Liverpool, not necessarily in the next few years, of course. We don't expect Jurgen Klopp is going anywhere for a while, but he's always been one that I've kind of had my eye on. Thomas Tuchel, obviously available. That probably doesn't help Nagelsmann at Bayern. It's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens there because, like I say, he is one that I'd certainly have my eye on at some point in the future. It might just depend on how long he's at Bayern, and that might depend on how quickly he can turn around this run of form.
Yeah, I mean, I think Josh Williams did a piece on it the other day for .com actually about the kind of carousel of these kind of classic potential Klopp successor coaches who have been cited over the years. All of them are having their struggles at the moment, really. I mean, Steven Gerrard, of course, is the most familiar to a lot of Premier League fans. But then, like you say, Nagelsmann's been off to a rough start. It's not necessarily been the best of times for Marco Rose. So there's certain coaches who have been mentioned. I mean, maybe Jesse Marsch is having a bit of a comeback. He seems to be doing okay with Leeds, but he got the Leipzig job and promptly lost it. So a lot of these names who you think could replace Klopp have maybe had setbacks, but it's not as if Klopp himself didn't have setbacks. He was relegated with Mainz after getting them promoted. So, and of course the final Dortmund season where he was in the relegation zone at the halfway point. So it wouldn't be. These aren't things that would rule out a coach to be the next Liverpool manager. And like you say, with Klopp still expected to be here through to 2026 at least, there's plenty of time for lots to change and for entirely new names to emerge. It's one of the trickiest tasks, isn't it? Trying to work out who your next manager is going to be, because you don't know when the current one's going to leave, you don't know when you're going to need one, and you don't know who's going to be available. So, yeah, I don't envy FSG that task, but I agree with you. Nagelsmann is one to keep an eye on, and the fact that it's been a bit of a bumpy start for Bayern doesn't change that really.
Yeah, and he's certainly still young enough that it could be a long time after 2026 that Liverpool come back to him as well. So yeah, plenty to keep an eye on there. But I think that'll just about do us this morning. The Blood Red podcast is on its way later on today. Loads more content throughout the week as well. We're going to have a bit more of a chat, I think, around Steven Gerrard, Brendan Rodgers as well, potentially for the Liverpool.com podcast. That should be coming your way on Tuesday. So do keep an eye out for both of those two things and all the rest of Blood Red's content throughout the week on YouTube and as podcasts as well. But for now, I think that'll do us. We'll see you later.